Today I thought I would talk about some stereotypes that the Dutch have of Americans. And there are a few, and as an American who now lives in the Netherlands, I thought I would, weigh in on the subject and give you my 2 cents. So let's get started. First and foremost, I would say that the stereotype that is leveled against Americans by the Dutch and other Europeans is that we are fake. And I would like to say that I think that stems from the whole have a nice day culture and the tendency for Americans to beat around the bush when approaching a subject and not always being forthcoming with their true feelings. So I suppose to some extent there is some truth to that stereotype. But I must say, something that I firmly believe is that the kindness that Americans exhibit in terms of their friendliness and even in their have a nice day statements, for the most part, I feel is genuine. What it doesn't mean, and that's where I think some people may make an error in judgment, is that by saying have a nice day or having a friendly conversation with someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that we expect to be best friends. The friendship forms over a period of time. And I know that the Dutch pride themselves on their directness, and I actually have come to appreciate that because I think it's transparent and I think it's more efficient at times. However, I will say that I hold to the fact that I don't think there is any excuse for, undue cruelty or unkindness. For example, if a person gets a haircut and, you feel compelled to express your personal opinion by saying, I think you looked better before you got the haircut, I don't know. I don't think there's any value in that personally. I don't feel that level of quote-unquote transparency or honesty, again, has any value. If someone asks for your opinion, yeah, sure, you're free to express that opinion and be honest about it. But to volunteer that opinion when it's unkind, I don't have a lot of space for that. And actually, that's not something that I endorse personally. But with regard to Americans being fake, well, it depends again on how you view it. I personally feel that I, as an individual, am more myself, I suppose, than I otherwise might be. But, we all wear social masks. I'm reminded of the time when I met Oprah Winfrey, and she was recording an episode for her famous show at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and she was running up the legendary front steps of that museum, which features prominently in one of the Rocky movies. And so she was emulating that whole triumphant run up the front steps, and there was so much energy and enthusiasm and a smile on her face. And as soon as the cameras stopped recording, the face went flat and she just became like anyone else, which is understandable. I mean, she can't always be on. And in fact, when I met her in one of the galleries and I approached her and asked her if she would like to meet the curator, to get some more background about some of the paintings that she was admiring, she turned to me and said, "I'm going to the bus." So I'll never forget that. It's not exactly the exuberant, electrifying Oprah that we have come to know on television. But again, we all put on a social mask, I think, to an extent, when we are out and about, and it may not accurately reflect how we are and who we are in the privacy of our own home. So there is that. But let's move on to the next topic. Another stereotype that the Dutch have about Americans and other Europeans and perhaps people from other cultures have about Americans is that we are loud. And I don't know, am I loud? I don't think I'm loud. But again, I'm not representative of most Americans. Now, I suppose it's true when people encounter American tourists, they can be loud. And in fact, I have to say that when I overhear Americans here, and I've been here for so long that I guess, maybe I'm more Dutch than American, but sometimes I'm a little bit shocked by the level of volume that's being expressed in terms of how they express themselves. And I don't know. I suppose I could attribute that to enthusiasm for the place that they're visiting. That would be a more flattering way of looking at that. I want to say also that many years ago, when this discussion of stereotypes came up at work, I asked a Dutch colleague, after we talked about the stereotypes of Americans that the Dutch have, I asked her, well, what are some of the stereotypes about the Dutch that others may have? And she said to me that the Belgians, among others, view the Dutch as loud. So, I guess that's just something that can be said of various cultures. We maybe are not as demure as the Japanese or others that we may think of as sort of more quiet. But if I'm any example of an American, I have to say that, well, I'm not particularly loud, never have been. But again, I'm probably not representative of most Americans. And on that note, I have to say that, it's difficult to summarize an entire body of people in a country, particularly one the size of the United States, where there are more than 330 million people. So it's difficult to say that Americans are any given thing because it depends on, I would say, the American. One of the other stereotypes about Americans that the Dutch have, that comes up quite a lot, is that we are fat. And, it's true that in terms of obesity, the United States ranks highly. We're not in the top 10, by the way, for what it's worth, but we are at number 13, and that was based on a measurement of BMI, body mass index, over or equivalent to 30. And in that regard, 42% of Americans are obese. And that is a shocking statistic. I attribute that to the quantities of relatively inexpensive and unhealthy food, the proliferation of fast food restaurants and the ultra-processed food that is available. It's increasingly difficult, not only in the United States, but everywhere, to find healthy, whole food anymore. They've done studies recently that suggest that the majority of items in a grocery store, again, especially in the United States, are not wholesome and not healthy, not even real food. They are ultra-processed to such a point that they really don't deliver healthful benefits. So, yeah, this is a stereotype that is sadly true. I remember that when I was in the U.S. In the last couple of years, I did my own informal survey. I was in a Starbucks getting a coffee, and I looked around, and there were 10 of us, conveniently, in the Starbucks, both people that worked there as well as customers. And 7 out of the 10 of us, and I included myself, were overweight or obese. And yeah, I see that everywhere, and that has to do again with the supersize, volumes of cola that they're drinking, and the buckets of fried chicken, and yeah, the availability of food again, which is not particularly healthy. So sadly, that is a stereotype that is all too true. However, once again, it doesn't apply to me. I'm happy to report that I'm not fat, not in the least, and never have been. But that has something to do with my upbringing. My mother was a bodybuilder and takes physical fitness and nutrition very seriously. And I inherited that mentality. And certainly living here in the Netherlands now for 22 years has kept me more fit because the quantities are smaller, the food is more healthy, and I am more active in my day-to-day life because I walk and I bike for most things. And I don't have a car, for example. So now, let's move on to the next stereotype. Another stereotype of Americans that the Dutch have is that we are arrogant, that we think that we're better than anyone else. Now, I suppose that could be true in some cases. Certainly that is not my perspective. But again, I have a more worldly view. I've lived in the Netherlands now for much of my life, and so I have a better sense of life outside of the United States, and I know full well that there are many ways in which the Netherlands is better than the United States, or that life in the Netherlands is better than in the United States, at least for me. And I've talked about that in a previous video. There are ways in which the United States outshines the Netherlands. Ouch, I know the Dutch won't like to hear it, but it's true. I'll save that for another video. Again, you know, no country is a utopia, so you're not going to find perfection in any given country. But arrogance, yes, I think that that has something to do with another stereotype, and that's ignorance. And I think for a lot of Americans, you know, maybe based on the sheer scale of the country, that they really don't think beyond their own borders. The culture there is so prevalent in terms of the music and the movies and the television shows. And the country, again, is so vast. You can fly for 6 hours straight and still be in the same country, speaking the same language, immersed in the same culture. So I think it is much easier for Americans to live within their bubble and not always be cognizant of other countries, other cultures, other perspectives. So there is a degree of ignorance, and I think that that is related to the arrogance. I think then you can begin to assume that you are living in the best country on the planet. Sometimes the Dutch and other Europeans will say that Americans are stupid. And, well, I've looked at a few studies along those lines, and it's interesting to report that neither the United States nor the Netherlands ranks among the top 10 in terms of IQ scores. And I know that that's not really a fair assessment because IQ tests are most likely not available in every country, and I'm sure that every IQ test differs, and how much that is a measure of genuine intelligence, I'm not so sure. But for what it's worth, the top 3 countries in terms of IQ scores are Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore. Another measure are test scores with regard to mathematics and reading and science. And once again, neither the United States nor the Netherlands ranks in the top 10 in that regard. The top 3 countries in terms of test scores are Singapore, China, and Japan. There is a third measure of intelligence that is new to me, and it's called the Intelligence Capital Index. And if I read, the Intelligence Capital Index measures which nations are most likely to expand the frontier of knowledge and or introduce the technology and innovations of the knowledge economy. And on that particular measure, the United States ranks number 1, followed by the United Kingdom and Germany. Another stereotype that the Dutch have about Americans is that Americans are religious. And yeah, that's a stereotype that is without a doubt true. I've made several notes here, and I'll refer to that. Religion in the United States is without a doubt widespread. The United States has the largest Christian and Protestant population in the world. Judaism is the second largest religion in the U.S., practiced by 2% of U.S. citizens, and that's followed by Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, each with 1% of the population represented. And, naturally this varies from state to state. I read that religiosity in a state like Mississippi scores at 63% in terms of adults that are self-proclaimed religious. And in a state like New Hampshire, that is only 20%. So once again, as with most of these stereotypes, it is really difficult to make a general sweeping statement, especially about a country that is as large and diverse as the United States. Nevertheless, there is always a kernel of truth in stereotypes, and I think they're worth talking about as we're doing today. And I did read that some social scholars attribute the religious tendency in the United States to the foundation of the country, where many people were fleeing religious persecution. And so the country was really founded on the concept of religious freedom. And that ties in. So there's this sensibility of religion that runs through the country in terms of its origins. And social scientists, I'm reading again, have noted that beginning in the early 1990s, and this is interesting, the percentage of Americans professing no religious affiliation began to rise from 6% in 1991 to 29% in 2021. And that comes as no surprise to me. We see that tendency in other cultures as well. There is a movement away from religion, and in some cases that's being replaced by spirituality. In my opinion, spirituality predates religion. Religion is something man-made. It's what man has made of God, if you will, or the concept of God. So I certainly don't intend to get into religious discourse in this video. I can say for myself that I went to a Christian school, actually, as a child, a non-denominational Christian school, and learned there in that school apologetics, which was really about defending the faith. And for a period of time, I bought into much of that. However, over time and in my own experience and in my travels and in my studies, I opened up my mind sufficiently to, really move away from religious dogma. And although I am a spiritually minded person, I don't tie into any particular religion and have not for a long time. And so again, I guess I am an exception to that particular stereotype, at least now. The last stereotype that I thought I would talk about, and it's one that again is leveled against Americans by the Dutch and I'm sure other Europeans, and that is that Americans are patriotic. And that is a stereotype which does prove to be true. It's difficult to quantify and to measure something like patriotism. However, there was a survey conducted by YouGov, and they surveyed people from 19 different countries and simply asked the question if your country is the best country in the world. And based on the responses received, 41% of Americans answered yes to the question, my country is the best country in the world, the statement. And 32% of Americans apparently in this survey believe that the U.S. is, quote unquote, better than most countries. And if I'm going to shift through my other stereotypes, I would say that that relates to ignorance. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I think that Americans, again, don't always realize the world around them offers so much more, and in many cases, better situations and higher standards of living and better access to things like health care and a better work-life balance and a happier nation, and I could go on and on. Patriotism, I'm reminded of the famous quote by Samuel Johnson, who was a political essayist back in the day, way back in the day, and in the late 1700s, he said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel." And it's quite a strong statement to make, of course. I do think that patriotism can be dangerous. It can be dangerous, and it can be ill-informed. There is something to be said for having pride in one's country, I suppose. It's not something that resonates for me. You may have heard me talk about the fact that I don't believe that I am my nationality. I don't even believe that I'm my name. I don't believe that I'm my occupation. There's so much that I am not. And certainly I think I'm not a person who is particularly patriotic with regard to the U.S. I am happy to say that there are many great attributes of the United States. I think it was founded on some sound principles. I do think it has gone astray, and I do think it is in decline. I think it has been in decline since at least the 1950s. So those are just my observations, but I'm not a particularly patriotic, flag-bearing individual. Absolutely, you're not going to see me chanting USA, USA. Even if I'm in the USA, it's just not my style. Again, I'm not one of the loud Americans. I have to say that when I review these various stereotypes, I don't identify with a lot of them. I don't think they apply to me. I may be, in fact, the exception to every rule when we talk about this list of stereotypes. I'm not religious, I'm not patriotic, I don't consider myself ignorant or arrogant, I don't think that I'm stupid, I don't think that I'm loud, I'm not fat, and I don't think I'm fake. I mean, maybe I am, but no more than anyone else, I guess, in terms of, putting on a social mask and putting on a smile, when I'm broadcasting, But I'm just me, and I'm just my genuine self, and I strive to be that way. So again, I feel like I am an exception to many of these stereotypes, and I think that's important to note because I'm not alone in that regard. And I think it is so important that we recognize that not everyone lives up or lives down, as the case may be, to the stereotypes that we have of the country where they happen to come from. I consider my nationality, frankly, an accident of birth. I've described it in that way many times. I didn't do anything to earn it or deserve it or have the curse befall me, however you may wish to perceive it. I just happen to be born there, and it is not who I am. So I just thought we would talk a little bit about some of the stereotypes that the Dutch have of Americans and that I know other Europeans and other people from around the world may have of Americans, and maybe even some Americans have of themselves. It's a topic worth talking about and airing out and getting it out there on the table. So I look forward to your feedback on this subject, and I want to thank you again for watching this video and some of my others, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care.